Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners Policy Session for May 3rd, 2023. Administrator Gary Schmidt, would you please call the roll?
Thank you, Chair Smith. All commissioners are present this morning. Your first session is North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District. Would you please convene as the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District Board?
I will recess as the Board of County Commissioners and convene as the North Clackamas County Parks and Recreation District.
This policy session, you are meeting as the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District Board of Directors. This is System Development Charges, Capital Improvements Project List Update. Mike Bork, the Director of North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District, and Heather Cook, the Planning and Development Director for the district, are here to give a presentation and then your discussion. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Gary. Good morning, directors. I'm going to try and keep this simple. We gave you a staff report that lays out all the mechanics, but really what we're trying to do is as we prepare for next fiscal year of expending money on certain projects, these three that are listed potentially, we need to have them added onto our SDC list to be able to use SDC dollars. The complication is that we have not updated our SDC or CIP list since 2007, and that is the existing list and ordinance that we need to go off of. So what we're asking today and recommending is that we place on the agenda for a first and second reading of the ordinance change to very simply place these three projects on the SDC CIP list. We're not doing anything else with the rest of the list. That, if you all remember, is going to happen in our system plan process, where we'll be redeveloping a whole new set of capital projects based on community input. This is really just for us to be able to expend SDC dollars on projects. They have to be on the list. So that's what we're asking for you to authorize, is to put that into place to make that happen. Beyond that, the rest of it is really mechanical of just adding on and the steps that need. So I'll stop there and answer any questions that you may have. And I have Heather Cook here to answer if there's any technical questions that are beyond mine.
Welcome, Heather Cook. Commissioners, questions? I do have one while they're thinking. On page 2, you have projects, you have cost estimates, and you have funding sources. And you have a general fund listed on all three. What makes a general fund an option for you?
With general fund is how a lot of our capital projects have been funded in the past, and at least a small part of general fund, our general fund, not county general fund, okay, NCPRD general fund.
It's confusing.
Sorry.
Yes, so in future, could you say?
NCPRD general fund.
Thank you.
Yes, we will do that.
Okay, good. Commissioner Scholl, you're up.
Mr. Bork, help me understand how this works. Now you have three projects here, totaling, looks like $22 million worth.
Those are estimates.
Okay, those are estimates. And how were those estimates derived at?
Those were driven, and Heather, if you need more detail, can provide, but really just looking at, based on the scope of what has been talked about for these, and I'll use, Concord is different. We have a much firmer number on that as we're getting ready to expend. 14 is kind of the high end. We had to list in the project what a budget estimate, so we listed on the high end. Jennings Lodge and Hull Swanson, we don't have any identified funding sources for those yet, but for us to be able to put a project together that has SDC dollars, they need to be reflected on the SDC list. So I wouldn't put a lot of stack in those estimates at this point, because they are really just, this action is giving us the ability to spend SDC dollars on here. This isn't what we're planning on spending on there, if that makes sense.
Okay, we're getting closer. So of these costs, what percent of those costs would be paid by SDC dollars? And by adding these projects, how are the potential for receiving SDC dollars increased accordingly?
There's no potential increase by putting in our SDC dollars that we collect by adding these projects on. We collect the SDCs in our 3 different zones. If you remember, we have a zonal SDC policy. We collect those SDCs in the zones. What this does, and for the percentages, again, Heather can provide more detail, but each SDC or each project has an eligibility percentage that you can spend up to X amount of SDC dollars for the project. So no project is fully funded with SDCs. It's always a small portion. The percentage varies depending on the eligibility in the project. And Heather, did you want to add any more on that, or is that a?
I think that pretty much sums it up. There are specific, each of these projects has different
Would you
eligibilities.
please pull your microphone
Yeah,
closer? Thank
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you, Chair. Yeah, each project has a different eligibility rate based on the methodology that was passed in 2007. So that won't change, nor will the SDC rates change. In a future moment, if we were to update the methodology itself, then those rates could change at that time, and those eligibility rates could change. But this amendment doesn't do any of that. It just adds them to the list because the methodology change would be in the future.
Okay, one last question. By putting these 3 projects on the SDC SIP list, how would it negatively affect other projects?
It doesn't.
It doesn't?
No, because again, especially for Concord, if you see, so we've got our cost estimate column that you were asking about, our 22-23 budget column that we're talking about. You see for Jennings Lodge, we had $150,000 budgeted for schematic design and community work, the $6.4 million for Hoodview. So those were already costs that had been budgeted. We just don't currently, once the budget is passed for next fiscal year, for us to spend any money in SDCs on the Concord project, and right now I think it's about $2 million in SDCs for that particular part of the project, unless it's been added on and approved by ordinance, we can't use that $2 million that has been budgeted in the budget previously. So that's the action that we're going. A lot of this has already been put into operational budgets and construction budgets. We just don't have the authority on these specific 3 projects to use any SDC dollars.
Understood. Thank you.
You can always come back, Commissioner Scholl, if you think of something else. Commissioner Savas.
Yeah, done this before, so I don't have a problem with what the ask is. I totally understand that. So, but what I do have a question on is more so with the Jennings Lodge one, anyhow, is this the principle of spending money on property we don't own and the agreement in which that is secured for an investment? And so can you elaborate on that? And also with the access issue, is this access 24 hours a day or similarly to other park facilities that we would own? Can you give me a little bit of idea about how this project, the Jennings Lodge elementary school project, is coming together? What's that looking like?
We really can't give a lot of detail right now because we are right in the middle of the negotiations with the school district for the updated IGA. But talking about issues of access and hours of use and our ability to be on the property, those are all things that I can say we're talking about. But right now, we're right in the middle of refining that IGA.
Yeah, it is, and my concern is this, is that it's not the same as spending park dollars on facilities that are not owned. Well, that really is the issue
Right.
here. That really is. No,
Yeah,
and
New Urban is another property. There's several of them, and that's why I've been trying to take a more measured approach on things like Jennings Lodge. You see, we budgeted $150,000 to get us to a conceptual design point to develop a budget for what a development might cost, but there's no money in any way in next year's budget to do any kind of construction at this point. That would be a whole separate process. Getting this added on just gives us the ability, if it moves to a construction phase, that we can spend. And for that $150,000, because that's design money I'm looking over, we can spend SDC dollars on even that $150,000. So, it's that type of project I'm trying to be very cognizant of. the fact of, and again, like New Urban, like others, it's land that we don't own that we're trying to manage and develop by contract. So none of this action obligates or specifies anything beyond what we're showing here.
I totally get that. That's
Yeah.
why I'm okay with the action today. So I totally understand that. Okay, the dollars are applied to planning. That's the beginning, right? That's the genesis of what this, because I just want to just flag
Yeah.
that the sooner we get an agreement and have access to the facilities and the dollars are not, stranded, so to speak.
And that's why we're working on it actively right now.
Yep.
Yep.
So, yeah, I'm happy to move forward, Chair, at any time.
Good, thank you. Any other questions or comments from commissioners on this? Commissioner Schrader, you're up.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you, Mike, because I know that you guys have been pollination conscious with some of the development there, so keep up the good work with that. I know it's my kind of quirky thing, but it's important, actually. So
We
it's-
will. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing this forward because parks are important, especially in our urban areas where they may not have immediate access to the great out-of-doors, the woods or the big Mount Hood territory or anything like that. So this is important that we go through on this. Commissioners, I believe our action today, I'll entertain a motion for option number 2.
I move for option number 2 to schedule the first reading.
Second.
Commissioner Savas has moved that the BCC schedule the first reading of an ordinance amending the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District's System Development Charges Ordinance at a business meeting on May 18, 2023, and schedule a second reading of this ordinance on June 1st, 2023. Commissioner Schrader has seconded the motion. Any further discussion? Tony, please take the poll.
Director West.
Aye.
Director Scholl.
Aye.
Director Schrader.
Aye.
Director Savas.
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much, and we will see you soon.
Yes, thank you all very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Gary, we're a little bit ahead of schedule.
The staff's here to move forward if you'd like.
Okay, let's do her.
Would you please reconvene as the Board of County Commissioners?
I will recess as the North Clackamas Parks and Recreation District and reconvene as the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners.
Next policy session is update on Clackamas County no parking practices. Staff from Transportation and Development, Mike Besner, the Assistant Director, Joe Merrick, Traffic Safety Manager, will present. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Chair Smith, Commissioners, Administrator Schmidt, appreciate the opportunity to talk about how we handle no parking practices in Clackamas County. We've actually been doing this a long time within the Department of Transportation and Development. We're responsible for adding no parking signs or painting curbs yellow, which is the equivalent. If there's, in locations where there's a potential hazard if parking is allowed. Usually the requests for those zones come from members of the public or from county staff. Each request is reviewed, and we do an engineering investigation to see if it's warranted, see if there is a hazard. Generally, if we do have a potential hazard, it's usually related to accessibility. Somebody can't turn into a driveway, for example, if somebody's parked sight distance. You can't see coming out of an intersection if somebody's parked too close to it. Or if there's high pedestrian interactions, like near Barton Park, for example. We also get other requests for emergency services if it blocks their access to locations that could have wildfires and stuff like that. There's a lot of reasons why these get triggered, potentially. So when we determine that a sign is, or a no parking sign or stretch is warranted, DTD installs the signs. The DTD director has delegated authority to do so. And then enforcement of no parking zones is the responsibility of the sheriff's office. So we do coordinate with them on a lot of these locations to make sure that they're good with them. Currently, we have about 1,000 no parking signs up and about 50 miles of yellow painted curbs. There's a lot of them. We're currently looking at the yellow curb. We want to convert that to signs. It's going to take a few years. It's a pretty big undertaking. Yellow curbs are pretty big maintenance headaches, and they're not as visible as the signs, so it's a little harder for enforcement. So that'll be about 2,000 more no parking signs we anticipate but like I mentioned, that'll take us a few years. One individual sign costs us probably between $150 and $200. There's economies of scale if we're doing a whole bunch of them, but to fabricate the sign, put it together, and install it. And funding for that currently comes from the County Road Fund. If anybody does have a zone where they want to request no parking, we have a pretty good process in place, and it's the same as every other road concern. And our website, which is www.clackamas.us/transportation/road concern. If you just Google Clackamas County Road Concern, it'll take you right there. We also have a phone number that can be reached during business hours, 503-557-6391. So welcome any questions you might have.
Do you have anything to add, Joe?
Joe's my hired gun.
Got it. We're just waiting for him to come on. So what you're saying, if we want to add any new no parking signs, you go out, you kind of engineer it, whoever, your traffic engineer, and then do we ask permission from the sheriff's office?
We don't ask permission necessarily. We collaborate at times, and we'll work together to say, hey, does this make sense? We don't ask them about every single one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but there's times where they're iffy or we just want to check with them. We'll communicate with them.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out how this works, because you mentioned the sheriff's office. That makes total sense to me.
You want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, good morning, Joseph Merrick, Traffic Safety. So the regulatory part is under the parking and towing ordinance in the county code, which is under the sheriff's office side of the house. So if we have more higher profile installations, and we'll take Barton Park, for example. In fact, we're just in the process of adding a bunch of no parking signs on
What
Baker's.
was that, you're in the process of what?
We're in the process of adding a number of no parking signs on Baker's Ferry Road around the entrance to Barton Park. So that's a case because it's been more contentious that we've been working with the sheriff's office on that one because they have cases where they can cite for or they can actually tow. And then a lot of the more standard ones, like in the neighborhoods, we're putting those in actually because we have agreement with the fire district if we have roads that are 28 feet or less that we know park one side of the road. So like if we're putting those in as part of a development, we're not going to let the sheriff's office know, unless there's the problem.
I see.
And then we've worked with the sheriff's office on other issues, like there was some parking issues around a park up in the Altamont neighborhood that the sheriff's office was getting complaints, so we kind of coordinated with them and ultimately put up some time restriction parking. I think it was no overnight parking, so it's a bit varied, depending on the context and depending on the particular issues.
I have a second question regarding your memo at the end of page 1. You say $150 to put in a new sign, so these new signs would have an estimated total project cost of $300,000. Does that mean you're going to replace all the existing signs? What
No,
does that $300,000 mean? It's confusing.
Sorry about that. No, that's for us to replace all the yellow curbs
The curbs.
with signs, because the yellow curbs, the paint doesn't last. It's a maintenance headache.
It doesn't say that, but Mike, so these new signs have an estimated total project cost of approximately $300,000.
It was intending to refer to the sentences before it. I didn't do a very good job of linking them, so I apologize.
Okay, so the cost to repaint all of the yellow curbs in Clackamas County, is that what you're referring to?
Yes, to replace them with no parking signs.
To replace the yellow curbs with no parking signs would be $300,000.
Roughly, and that's spread over a few years. We wouldn't be doing that all at once.
Okay, all righty. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Yeah, I respect y'all, but this is not what we asked for. Granted, parking, the word parking was part of the request, but in several meetings, it was very clear that the request was for a discussion about a parking management plan for multiple reasons. Certainly, this was one narrow aspect of that, but this is far afield from what we discussed. Not just me, but we. I'm just wondering why we're only talking about no parking when we have greater issues out there. I don't know if I should go to the extent of trying to repeat myself, which I
Can I
really-
ask you a question?
Sure.
Do I remember this right? When we talked about this, was this in relation to possible increased homelessness in the area?
Well, that too, that was one
the
aspect.
impetus I thought that this came from, and then it kind of morphed into something else. Is that
Well,
right?
that's part of it. The other part was, having reduced parking requirements for housing now, which is going to put a greater burden on there's a number of things that are important about this. So this is not what we asked for.
Okay.
So, may I?
Yeah.
So for a parking management plan, I mean, we thought we'd come and talk to you about how we do this, so I apologize if we missed the mark on that. Parking management plan isn't something, at least for DTD, that's in our planning department's current work plan. So we'd have to talk about how we would accomplish that.
Well, I recognize that, Mike, and I'm not going to pick on you because I don't think that, I don't know how we got where we got here today. So I'm not, all I'm saying is that this is not what we asked for. We had several conversations about this when we talked about housing, we talked about the parking challenges, we talked about safety as it relates to parking, both, no parking signs where there's a line of sight issue or where cars are being parked on the side of the road where otherwise pedestrians can't travel. There's a number of issues that we discussed at length, some of it while Commissioner West has been a commissioner and some of it while it has not been. Of course, logically, I agree. It's not in the parking, or it's not in the, in your plan, your work plan. But this was an attempt to get to that point. And it seems to me that the whole purpose of this is lost. I know that there's got to be an explanation as to why it's lost.
Director Dan Johnson has joined us. Let's
Yes,
let
I
him
have.
opine.
Hey, Chair Smith, Commissioners, I'm confused. And please help clarify it for me, because what I heard a discussion one week about about parking management plans, and there wasn't support for that. Then I heard parking signage, and there was support for that. And there were specific examples that you had shared, concerns from citizens that you had heard, concerns that were related to site distance, that were related to like somebody parking in front of their home, and the specificity around that. And maybe I misheard you, and we can talk about that.
All the above.
Yeah, and so those were specific concerns we had. So in response to that, the thought was, let's provide some background and understanding and information regarding the fact that we have systems in place to deal with those portions of those issues. So if the person or individual you're speaking with were to contact road concerns, as Mike stated earlier, are either via the phone or via the internet, we'd take that request, we'd go out, we'd take a look at it and assess the viability for assessing no parking for those areas. That's different, as you said, than this larger discussion on our parking management plan. And so I guess I don't know where, we can do whatever you like. I mean, we can do an assessment, whatever, but the discussions have been different week to week. Because again, I think there was one discussion about the parking management plan that wasn't approved by the board. The second was a discussion around the parking signage. So that's what we're kind of responding to, is providing that information on how we do the no parking signage. And if we want to do a broader discussion, and the board has direction on that, and there's interest in that, about parking plans, how we do that, we've talked about the fact that that's going to be consultant services. It'd be in concert with our long-range planning program and in concert with Joe and the traffic safety discussion. But we'd have to have more of a detailed dialogue around what the objectives are. Because yes, I know we've heard the concerns about the middle housing, and the lack of park and the impacts that has on the parking. And we've heard the concern about the climate-friendly strategies that have reduction in parking in certain areas and the concerns that are associated with that. Those concerns have talked about public roads. Those concerns have talked about private properties. Those concerns have talked about, because essentially a lot of that, for the public is not aware of this, those legislative mandates strip the ability for our jurisdiction to require parking in certain areas. But I guess we just need to have a discussion, I guess, with the board about scope and scale of that dialogue and the interest in where and what you're looking for.
Okay.
Well, it's feeling like we're right back at square one. I thought that's what this was supposed to be, right? That's what you asked for before. That's what you're asking for again. And yet we're back at square one saying, oh, we need to have the discussion when we have a narrow thing about no parking, I'm a little frustrated because I don't want to go back to the tape. I can take excerpts out of the tape from the meeting, but it was very clear what we had asked for, all the above, and then some. And we're here today ill-prepared.
I have 3 more commissioners in the queue. Commissioner Scholl?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Besner. Question. Okay, now I understand we have all kinds of different parking issues, but this morning we're looking at just the no parking area, no parking sign piece. That's fine. Okay, so you want to replace 50 miles of yellow curb. My question is this. In this 300K, will there be new no parking areas added? And is there a potential that there might be no parking areas added in areas that have already limited parking? Commissioner Savas referred to that, and I'm concerned about apartment complexes in particular, where we have very, very limited parking already. Could there potentially be more restrictions on parking in some of those residential areas out of this 300K?
The 300,000 is simply the cost that we're going to spend next few years phasing out yellow curbs. because they're being installed.
Okay.
We are all the time getting requests for us to look at new areas for no parking.
Yeah.
And we look at those, and if warranted, we will put signs up.
Yeah. Okay, I've got no problem with this. The other question I have for you is you mentioned that you could order the signs, get the price down if you order in volume. If you order 500 signs, could you store them at Mr. Johnson's new maintenance facility?
Well, we actually.
The county's new maintenance
Yeah, yeah.
facility.
Mr. Johnson's new county maintenance facility, that's really
Memorial.
nice?
Yeah, well, we make a lot of signs. We
Yeah.
buy signs, yet that is
Okay.
where we keep all our signs, is in our
Oh,
maintenance
is it? Okay,
facility.
yeah.
But the real savings would be installing in bulk as opposed to purchasing.
Okay, good, yeah. Well, good, this is fine, I have no problem with this.
Okay.
Just don't put one in front of my house, Mr. Bisner. I'm just kidding you.
Commissioner West, you're up.
So I'm going to piggyback on Commissioner Savas's comments. Sat down, took the time, read the policy session worksheet, and was like, this is not what we asked for. And maybe it's lost in translation as our ability to clearly communicate to you guys what direction we wanted. I thought it was clear. I can remember the conversation, just a few weeks ago when we had this conversation. But I was like, why are we talking about this today? It was my first thought. I mean, it was like, this is kind of a nothing burger brought to us. I'm just telling you how I saw it. But it didn't actually address a management plan that had been requested moving forward. At this point, I don't really care where that ball was dropped necessarily, but I thought the board was really clear in its ask.
There's 2 opinions anyway, and I have a different opinion, but Gary, you're in the queue.
I love you, commissioners. Oh, silence, just a laugh. Say, yeah, we love you too, Gary. Tony is an amazing clerk. I have the notes right in front of his screen here on exactly what you said on March 14th, 2023. With respect, there was not agreement by the board to have a session on a parking management plan. What I said is we'll have a policy session on the planning work plan so the board can redirect staff to add a parking management discussion if that's what you wish, and tell us what you want to remove. So that is what has not happened. I'll own that. That's the session we should have had, and we need to have immediately, before staff does any more work. So I'm looking right at the notes, commissioners. Thank you.
I remember that too. I am not remembering, and it just could be that we deal with so many topics all the time. Each one of us has what we think should be done, and maybe it's not articulated quite right, but I need to ask this question before we proceed further. Is this parking management plan in the long-range planning program that has been put together by staff that we approved of when, Gary?
So you had this discussion on March 14th, but your planning program was approved last year?
Yeah, currently it's not on there.
And so if we go down this road,
You have to take something away.
I think we need to look at the long-range planning program and see if we're going to take something off of that. I was told that at one point. Now, is that true, Gary?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so commissioners, if you want to make this a priority, I think we need to take a list of what we have already approved in the long-range planning program and see if anything else on that, because we can only do what we can do, okay? Just because we sit here and say, we want this, we want this, we want this, it's going to take staff time, and as we know, staff is, I think, working very hard and maybe overburdened somewhat because of the workforce scarcity issue. I'm going to be very delicate when I say that. So we can do this. I mean, it doesn't matter to me, but we need to go back and remember what we approved last year before we start adding more. We have a couple other commissioners. Commissioner Schrader?
Yeah, I just, this is more a question for my colleagues than staff at this point. What is the end game? What is the objective? What do we want to see an outcome being with a parking management plan? Is it a response to the top-down, things we're getting from the legislature and whatever about, limiting parking and how we're going to manage that? So for me, I would like to sit with a whiteboard with my colleagues and say, tell me exactly what is the outcome and result, because I think that would be clearer for you folks. Because, it makes sense. If they're going to limit parking, we're getting mandated to limit parking. Does that mean you put signs everywhere? I mean, I'm just trying to bring it down to, okay, it's kind of too broad right now.
Yeah, is the objective to provide more parking on our roads? Is the objective to provide less parking on our roads? Is the objective to provide, I mean, that's, and I guess, and I was just talking to Joe, and I apologize for walking away, but we also, as a part of that presentation, I think should provide some additional feedback and information on some analysis that we are doing currently on some of these roads. To either manage parking more appropriately. I'll use, for example, Causey Avenue. If you've driven up and down Causey, it's very congested in certain areas. We also have designs of roads that we've done where I look at like Monterey Avenue. We've built that to possibly provide on-street parking at some point in time. Is the parking management plan intended to kind of open those corridors up and provide more parking there? Or is the objective to provide less parking and be more restrictive with it? And that's the kind of clarity before we go into a discussion around just hopping to the plan. If we could get some help from the board to kind of really ascertain what the objective is, that would help us. Again, there's no ill will or intent for this presentation today. The discussion I heard and the concerns I heard were valid, and they were valid from citizens that you're hearing from. And it's more of an informational exercise to provide information on the process, and that was the intent. I don't care, I mean, we could do it at a planning session maybe, I don't know, but some broader discussion around this if you wish, but we can go back. I want to tell you right now, that long-range planning program it's got the minor, it is staff deficient right now. We do not have a lot of staff there. We've got basically our the minor amendments package you put forward, and I believe the only other thing we have on there right now is the climate-friendly, equitable discussion going on that we're tracking and managing, and then we're waiting for this legislative session to see what drops, and what drops from them mandating to us what we need to do, that program will have to kind of take under its wing and move forward. And so I get leery, I get concerned is a better word, concerned about the fact that if we're going to dedicate funds to move this discussion and just making sure it's a priority. I mean, moving this discussion in the way we want to move it, but we're doing that without having an awareness of what's coming down from the legislature, because there are some things coming down that we're probably going to have to deal with.
Thank you. That's what I was alluding to, because I think that part of this, what's driving this, is out of our control. And how do we respond to those legislative changes in our planning department? And what does it mean? Do we somehow make it somehow? So even though they say we have to limit parking, we're going to make sure there's parking. I mean, you see, I just want, what's the outcome?
And we have little ability to unfortunately, doesn't mean the market can't provide it for especially on-site development.
Right.
They can provide the parking they feel is sufficient, but their ability to mandate it and require a certain amount has been taken away from us. Yep.
Okay, thanks. Thanks.
Commissioner Savas?
Well, I think it's becoming evident maybe that staff's not prepared to do this. Perhaps that's why we're here today with this quandary of how the discussion really didn't happen. I appreciate what Gary just read back. I don't disagree with that. There was more to it than that, and conversations that followed it, conversations that preceded it, obviously. But yeah, I spent an hour, talking to people on Causey and Monterey on Friday about parking issues out over there. Okay, it's everywhere. It's in my neighborhood. It's everywhere. People that live in Portland parking their vehicles in Clackamas County. We ought to be doing something about that, right? They don't have any connection to the neighborhood, but they're parking their vehicles.
Yeah.
Commercial,
We
private.
don't have a jurisdictional boundary, a wall that's gone up that says you
So
can't park
what?
in our area.
We're just going to sit here, be sitting ducks, or we're going to be proactive like other jurisdictions are? And when I made the comments about looking at other models of other jurisdictions, that should be somewhat of a staff, alleviate some work from staff. But hey, if you have a staffing shortage, you got a staffing shortage. Higher up, right? If it's not in the budget, let's budget. But that doesn't mean that our progress or putting in the plan should stop. Or we need to wait for it to be staffed up before we put it in the plan,
I appreciate
that's why
that.
we're here.
I appreciate that. That's a budget
why we're
discussion
here.
that we're going to have, and it's a very difficult one to have. But I'll tell you that this is a deeper, we're not afraid to have the discussion around the plan. That's not what I want to make sure crystal clear about that. But I want to make sure the board's eyes are wide open in regards to the establishment of that plan, and we're able to provide enough information to you to make a more educated decision around, is this important? Because we've had these talks offline. It's like, where do we do this? It's like, where is it? What is it? I mean, we don't have enforcement for it. It'd be a discussion with the sheriff's office in a lot of these cases in regards to if the intent is to develop like a permitting program in communities where you see in some of those areas, like City of Portland, et cetera. Or is it a pay-to-park discussion, like downtown Milwaukee, or Oregon City, pardon me. I mean, there's startup costs to that, and there's associated costs to that. And so we can talk about those tools, but again, that's probably going to be a discussion around hiring a contractor, going out there and having a discussion. And before we do that, get a scope of work and what you're really looking for.
Is that it? I'm going to make a suggestion, Commissioner Savas.
Well, please, go ahead.
I
at a quandary right now.
understand what you want to have happen, and I understand your frustration, but I think before the board proceeds on this, Gary, I would like to be provided with a list of the long-range plan that this board previously approved, and I would like all commissioners to read that through, because if this is going to take what I suspect the kind of effort, time, and money, then we need to remove something off of that. And maybe this is more of a priority than when that was. Again, we're being pushed on climate action. We're being pushed on middle housing. The next session that's coming up is in response to a legislative mandate on camping. So I am going to be very hesitant to bring this back to the board until sine die on this legislative session to know what kind of mandates are facing us and what we have to do that we don't want to do, right? I mean, these mandates from the legislature are killing us. It inhibits our ability to respond to our own citizens' and neighbors' needs regarding what Commissioner Savas was talking about. He gets complaints about parking. And why are these people parking there, possibly in front of their house where they can't park their own car, but yet we have somebody from another jurisdiction just leaving it there and abandoning it or whatever. So these are real issues. I understand that. But from a very practical governance point, we're going to have to figure this out as we go forward. We have Commissioner Scholes up next.
Mr. Besner, the $300K, you can pay for that out of the county road fund?
Yeah,
Okay, so you said it would take about 3 years.
4 years.
So it should be relatively easy to pull out $100K for each year for the next 3 years to get this done. This replacement of the yellow curbs with signs, this is a safety issue. This is something I think we should wrap our heads around today. We can look at other elements of county parking in the future, but I would like to see Transportation and Development gets started on replacing those curbs with these new signs, it's an easy deal. So I support that.
It's going to be ongoing, yep.
I support that.
It's
Thank you.
ongoing.
Yeah.
So good.
Mark, thank you for that. I don't think we have to instruct them to do it. You say it's ongoing. Commissioner Savas, you're up.
Chair, I don't know how the agendas are set. I don't know how the packets are put together, but I thought we had steps in place to prevent things like this from happening.
What happened?
That our time and the work scheduled and the agenda setting would prevent things like this from happening. I feel as though that, it just feels as though that there's not a will, even though the board directed it to happen. And so I don't know if we're not in charge. I heard what the chair said. Chair, I'm not being disrespectful at all, so please. What I'm trying to say here is that we gave direction. It's just not followed.
I think a lot of us gave direction, Paul, and I think we all had a separate opinion on this. I know my opinion was different than what you're saying today. I thought that the parking plan on that initial conversation was trying to identify areas where parking was a problem and that was not posted regarding people coming in from other jurisdictions, regardless of their status. I wasn't sure that we were going to dip into the entire parking management plan. I was not convinced that there was a consensus at this board. But if there is a consensus at this board to do, I will entertain that once the board has an opportunity to look at what the long-range plan was that we previously approved, and we see what the legislature mandates are going to be sine die for this session. I'm not closing the door on this at all, Commissioner Savas. There is a way, but we can't do everything all at the same time. Commissioner West.
I mean, having the opportunity to review that plan would be fantastic for me because I haven't, because I'm new. So that's good history for me to have. But I cannot help but like completely empathize with Commissioner Savas's frustration. And maybe it's because I feel like some of this is not just isolated to this incident, in my perception. I want to make sure that that the will and the efforts of this board are carried out, and that we are not getting stuck in a quagmire, or that we don't feel like that there's resistance in the directions in which we give. And I don't want us to be reactionary either on issues, maybe like this parking issue. I feel like there's a real proactive approach directed that Commissioner Savas has got direction from constituents and from what he knows with, and trying to really address something that he wants to get ahead of before it balloons and becomes even worse. Even on the city level, I know it's different than when I was a Wilsonville City Councilor, but parking was such an issue. I know for local governments, it just is. It's something that we have to wrestle with. But I hope that we can get to a point to where we're not always reactionary, or that we're so slow, or and we don't get it done. But there's a little bit of a vibe that I feel as a commissioner where at times we're not moving forward in a way that's productive.
Okay. There's no lights on. I thought we had more lights on. Gary, can you sum up for today?
Can I do it?
Well, I think the last motion, I think what Gary read is what we need to have happen. So
Well, I'm not going to entertain that motion today, Commissioner Savas, because, as I said, if we make a motion to go ahead and redo the parking management plan, we don't know what other effects that's going to have on our long-range plan that we approved last year. We don't know the effects that it's going to have on the legislative mandates coming down. I suspect you know some coming down that we may not know about, which is totally fine. There's thousands of bills out there. We don't know what's going to happen with that. So, Commissioners, I would really appreciate it if we just stand down on this, and they're going to go ahead with their $300,000 and replace signs, replace the yellow strips with signs, and go forward with that. Commissioner Savas?
I don't have a problem with them continuing on with the $300,000 in replacing the signs. But the bigger issue is board direction, Chair. If you're going to block our board direction, again, I'm trying to be polite here. We made a motion. Gary read it back. That action was made. I don't hear anyone saying we want to go backwards. I don't disagree. If you want to include the work plan in that discussion, that's fine. No one said no to that. But if we're going to have one person block a board direction because that's how you feel today, then I don't see how we can be productive going forward. I'm trying to be respectful here, but this is really a process question. This is about, it boils down to the board rules, another can that's been kicked for a very long time.
Gary, would you read back what, was that a motion?
On March 14th, 2023, there was no motion. I said we will schedule a policy session to discuss the long-range planning work plan. So I propose that will be the next order of business, to bring to the board a policy session on the long-range planning work plan. You can review what you have already approved and decide what you want to change if you wish to add the parking management review.
And that's what I said. I am not blocking anybody, but we can have a discussion. I made that very clear, Commissioners. We can have a discussion on the long-range plan, and if we want to include a parking management plan at that time, we can do it. I have been very open with that. I'm sorry if somebody's in disagreement, but I think we can get there. It's just a matter of process. Nobody's blocking anybody from bringing anything forward. Thank you, Paul. Paul?
Oh.
Your light was on?
Yeah, it was on. Yeah. So, Gary, you read back more than that the first time. So, and I don't. Can you just do that? Why don't you just do that? Read back the entire.
Want to read the entire notes, Tony?
No. Read back entirely what you said earlier.
Okay, so there was not board agreement on going forward with the parking management plan. It was Commissioner Savas and Commissioner West who supported it, but the other three did not give indication they wanted to move forward. Tootie asked me, "What's next, Gary?" And I'm reading the notes. I said, we'll schedule a policy session on the long-range planning work plan to determine if the board wants to add the parking management plan to that and take something off the list.
Okay.
That's what I proposed.
So two commissioners made a request.
Yep.
We know what the policy is there. Staff is asking, I don't disagree. They want to understand what it is we're asking for. So I don't think I think the first step is to have a discussion about what's the scope. Commissioner Schrader kind of touched on that. What's the scope? What are you all trying to get? What do you all want to see? I think that's a valid thing to ask, and then fold into the discussion how that fits into a work plan as well. I think it's one or both, is both, frankly.
I agree. I said exactly that. I said exactly that a minute ago, but we're not going to be able to turn the table and do it like right now. I think there's other considerations that affect this. Commissioner Scholl, you're up.
Yes, on the long-range planning work plan for the county parking management plan, we have the budget coming up the next couple months. Is this something we could schedule for July? Is that possible? So we can get these questions answered?
So yes, I'd recommend holding on the review of the long-range planning work plan until the legislative session is ended, to see what other impacts will happen to your plan.
Which is
In
what
June
day?
30th, I think is the
Okay,
deadline.
yeah.
And we could, if you agree, we could go forward. Until then, you have monthly planning meetings. You could devote your next planning meeting to this topic to clarify what the board's interested in a potential parking plan. So that will then guide what staff will recommend back to you on the long-range planning review. So we could do that. You're not having a May planning session, but your June planning session, if you agree, this could be the topic.
Or July?
Or July. Well, there's two things. One, what are you actually interested in a parking plan, management plan? Hear what you're interested in, and then review the long-range planning plan to determine if you want to change the long-range plan to add a parking plan. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure.
Two different discussions.
I'm not sure what the ask is. I thought this was to restrict parking in certain areas, and then I hear we want to add parking. So we do have limited areas of, so I'm not even sure what the ask is. I will entertain what the board wants to do. I've always said that. But we have in the queue certain things that need to be taken care of, like the budget. I think if we would turn our attention, commissioners, to the budget, that's going to be dropped in May 15th.
15th.
I think that's going to take quite a bit of study on our part, but yes, we can go forward with this. I'm hesitant also to proceed along some other topics and policy in the county when this legislature has not finished its work going forward on this. And the next issue coming up is going to be very enlightening for us, I think. So Gary, I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and bring this up at possibly the next planning meeting. I think, commissioners, you need to let your PAs know or let Gary know what you want to have accomplished at the June planning meeting. We will not have one in May because we have budget. So if parking, adding more parking or restricting parking or adding signs or whatever is what you want, then you need to be very clear in what we want on that, so staff can go forward.
I hear, Chair, I hear staff asking for some time to discuss with us what we want. So Dan, how much time do you think you would like?
Let me get to that question in 1 second, pardon me, but I bet what we're going to forward to you is we're going to forward to you our long-range work program, number one, okay? And we're also going to forward to you some work that we're doing regarding some of those parking issues around CAUSE that's being done through our transportation maintenance or our traffic safety program, just to enlighten you of the work that's kind of going on. Now, in regards to time tonight, there's a push and pull on that discussion, and I think that push and pull is one around the size and scope and scale of that long-range planning program, what the capacity is, what's coming off, what's going on. We don't know what's going on, so I do appreciate the concern about the legislative discussion coming out. That doesn't mean we can't be asking you during that time. It's like individually, or if you want to forward your information to us directly, it's like, what are your thoughts around this parking plan? Are there specific areas you're looking at? Are there, when you say parking management plan, is it a metering program in certain areas, or is it a residential parking permit program? I mean, that kind of information would help, because that kind of information then helps us kind of scope what is needed on our end to provide you the answers to the questions that you have. And those questions are going to be around, like, geographically, where is it located? What kind of program is it? What's the startup cost for the program? What's the long-term operational cost for the program? And those are all things that I think are important for the board to know before we kind of move to that trigger. I'm not saying it's not a problem, and I want to make crystal clear to the board, there's no ill intent from staff to come in front of you and have a discussion around this and limit your ability to kind of move forward in the discussion. But it's more of having this dialogue with you about scope. What is the scope of this project? And what is the intent? Because in all honesty, I don't have a clear picture of that. I know you're upset because of some of the parking restrictions that are being taken away, or parking ability to require parking and things like that for like developments, middle housing, all that stuff, the climate-friendly stuff that all came down. And so I'm just not sure how we have to have a discussion around what your ideas are for meeting that need.
Dan, all I asked was how much time do you need to hear from us in a public session on this topic? That's all I asked.
When you say hear from you, you mean to have that discussion?
To understand what it is we're asking or what our concerns are. Yes, certainly there's a little bit of angst from us, right? Sure, we're a little bit upset, but our community's upset.
Yeah.
They're the ones that are upset.
Mm-hmm.
And when they watch a session like this, which some of them are going to, or probably are, I don't know who's watching, but when they hear, so we're dealing with it, we're going to deal with it. And here we are today, and we don't look very professional today. It doesn't look to them like we're really taking this very seriously. And I'm trying to get in front of it on behalf of the community we represent.
Okay.
On behalf of the taxpayers who pay our taxes, our gas taxes, our property taxes, we owe it to them to get ahead of this. I don't want this to turn into Portland.
Oh,
We're trying to protect our county.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Okay.
We are
So
here
how much time, an hour?
We are here on the direction of the board. You tell us how much time you want to have and when you want us to get this done. We can do it next month, we can do it next week, we can do it whatever you want to do.
All right, can I help here, please?
Gary?
90 minutes at your June planning session to discuss what you're interested in as a commission for a potential parking management plan. July, the policy session on your long-range plan, and then decide if you want to add parking or not. Is that acceptable, commissioners?
So I want to ask the commissioners, is there interest from this board to devote an huge amount of time to the parking management plan? A huge amount of time, effort, and money in light, and and most of it, and Ben, you haven't seen the long-range planning program.
not.
There may be something on it that you really like. I want to know if that's the direction we're giving today. Commissioner Scholl?
I like Administrator Schmidt's idea. I see no pressing reason to deal with this prior to July 1st. I think we can wait until then. We got a lot of things on our plate between now and then, and we can take this up and really dig into it after 1 July.
Commissioners? Commissioner Schrader?
I'm okay with that.
Commissioner West?
I'm okay with that.
And Commissioners, I would like to remind you that every week you're mailed the green sheet, and that is a schedule of requests from commissioners and staff of the meetings coming forward. And we were really full this month, April, March and April, and we've tried to accommodate commissioners' requests by having afternoon meetings, Wednesday meetings to go forward. So just take a look at the green sheet. If there's something on there that you want removed and this put in its place, I don't believe we have a green sheet yet much for June, correct? A little bit.
June is almost full, too. Yeah.
June is almost full too, for commissioner's request. All right, Commissioner Savas?
Dan, what House bills, legislative bills, timelines do we have to react? I thought that we had some deadlines to get some policies in place ideally, or to have there were things that we were trying to get in front of instead of, like Commissioner West said, be reactionary. And usually being reactionary is usually messier, it's more expensive, and it's less effective. And I don't want to be, I don't go there, I'm tired of that. I want to be in front of things. So isn't there a House bill, there was a couple of them that we had to act by a certain time, some expired at the end of the year, end of the fiscal year. Can you help me with that?
In regards to impacts to the long-range work program, or in regards to impacts to this?
to housing, parking, all those things. You had your staff here, Martha Fritzie, Karen Buehrig.
The big one is the climate-friendly, that phase 2 of that climate-friendly parking strategy, which we're still involved in the legal challenge on that, which County Council's taken the lead on. And there are no results have come down from that. So, but that, I believe that's implemented, that goes into the parking, and again, that's removing that climate-friendly action work is basically removing the ability for local jurisdictions to require certain parking in certain areas. So phase 1 basically went along those corridors like McLaughlin and 82nd, et cetera, those regional corridors, and then phase 2 looks at kind of expanding that into some of those regional centers. And I believe, I have to check with Jennifer, but I'll get back to the board on that and when that's due, when that's actually being implemented.
Yeah,
But that challenge is still out there, though. The legal challenge is still out there.
So how do we get a prize? It's something that's not incorporated in the green sheet, right? So how do we keep abreast of those things so that we as the board and yourselves and all of us are attuned, because we're supposed to take actions by certain dates. There's supposed to be progress on work.
Yep, and we came and gave a policy session.
And this is one of them. This
Yeah.
parking issue is one of those.
We
This is
came
one
and
of
gave-
those efforts within a timeline to do it. Countless meetings we've had really on this topic about parking and trying to get in front of it.
We came forward to the board, did a policy session on the phase 2 parking. At that point in time, the board didn't take any action, or there wasn't any additional direction to staff on that. Essentially, what was told is, let's keep monitoring the lawsuit, I believe, and the legal challenge, which is still in play.
Okay, I guess I'm going to try to get some kind of a timeline of all the different meetings and topics we've had. That's just work on myself and my staff, but I feel that this is very fragmented, and we haven't really followed through on this. This just doesn't feel very professional. Thank you. That's all I have for today.
Okay, we're going to end this session. Gary, you have direction?
Yep.
All right, thank you very much. What's up next?
Next policy session, Chapter 6.10, removal of persons from unlawful campsites. County Council will present.
Morning, folks.
Morning, welcome Stephen Magor.
Good to see you. Stephen Madcore here with Jeff Muns, here to provide the board with a summary of what the county has available to it to regulate unlawful camping on public property. We provided you with a policy session worksheet last week, which incorporates the current county regulations, Chapter 610, which have been in existence since 2007. That regulates unlawful camping on public property within Clackamas County, not within the cities, within Clackamas County itself. Cities can have their own regulations applicable to those unlawful campers. That legislation was amended a couple years ago by House Bill 3124 to add a few other things more specific to Multnomah County. But what it does is it allows for the removal of unlawful camping. You have to post the property. You have to post it in 2 different languages, conspicuously posted. You can then relocate, and you have to retain all property that has visible inherent value. You can get rid of dangerous property. You can get rid of human waste and derelict property. But if it's a bicycle that appears to be functional, you keep it. You keep it for 30 days. You let the camper come and pick it up. That currently is in county code, consistent with state law. We have employed that successfully in the past, primarily on West property. Down where the West plant is, there was a lot of camping going on down there. We had some successful interactions down there with relocating campers from there. The summary we provided you also has additional tools that are available to counties and cities in the state were the governing body interested in employing those things. The most recent one is 3113, which allows for time, place, and manner restrictions, not just on camping, but on sleeping, laying, lounging, interfering with sidewalk passage, and things along those lines. Were the county interested in employing time, place, and manner restrictions for those types of human activities, they would have to be objectively reasonable. Objectively reasonable is going to differ in every single location. Objectively reasonable in Portland is different than objectively reasonable in Clackamas County. We don't have any of those currently, but if this board were to give us direction to draft objectively reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions concerning that type of human activity, we can do that. It would be in the code. It would require 2 readings, 13 days apart, effective immediately and or 90 days afterwards. We provided you with the City of Bend's version of it. Very detailed, very specific. That was months of engagement with their public population, with their housing advocates, with their homelessness advocates, with business owners. It's a very robust program. It is still in the early infant stages. It's been not subject to, well, it's been, a lot of eyes are on it to potentially challenge it once it gets employed further. They have, like I said, a very robust system. City of Wilsonville is also on the verge of employing something along these lines. Theirs is a bit different. Theirs is allowing it in certain areas, in government-owned areas. You can park your licensed, insured, operating car here overnight or for a time period to spend the night on county or city property in that particular situation. Everybody has different standards. If this board were to say, yes, we are interested in accommodating, or we're interested in regulating, or we're interested in maximizing or minimizing these types of activities, give us marching orders and we can get you there. You will recall that there have been churches in the past that tried to allow this to happen. Neighbors challenged it. It resulted in a hearings officer's order saying, you can do it, but you have to put up an impenetrable 8-foot tall fence around there. You have to have security. You have to have hot water. You have to have restrooms. You have to have lighting. A whole list of really untenable and very expensive, economically expensive undertakings. So that plan fell through. But we also provided you with a white paper of sorts from the League of Cities on how cities are employing these time, place, and manner restrictions in response to the Boise case and also in response to the the Grants Pass case, which is even more far-reaching than the Boise case. All of those cases basically say you cannot criminalize and/or punish civil fines for those people who are sleeping on public property if they have no place else to go. So the no place else to go is a component of this. So if you were to do time, place, and manner restrictions, you would want to identify other places for people to go so they can be accommodated for those things. If you're going to relocate them, you need to have a place for it. So it's not just sweep, like whack-a-mole is how people have referred to these things. So it's part of the analysis. If you were to go down the path of time, place, manner, you would want to work with the H3S folks to make sure that we do have a spot where we could say, you can park your car over there if it's licensed, insured, and operable. You can spend the night over there in the Econo Lodge or other places along those lines. So you have tools available to you. You have legal restrictions that are currently present by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. So that is the law on the West Coast right now for those types of things, that you cannot decriminalize or you not criminalize or excessively fine this type of human behavior, because it is viewed to be cruel and unusual punishment is how the courts have characterized it. So with that as a background, happy to take any questions. We have Jeffrey Munns, who has presented on this item before, and he has advised the NCPRD folks on it. We also have Kathleen Rastetter, who has advised the BCS folks on it. They got some property. They had people down by the riverside who were occupying it, and we did a successful and effective sweep from that one as well. So we have the tools currently. They're not great. They're not as far-reaching as Bend or Wilsonville's or other jurisdictions, but we do have tools in our current code that allow us to respond to these things. But there are other ones available, but it's a board decision to give us some direction. So happy to answer any questions you might have.
I'm sure we do. So I guess my first question, how I look at problems is, number one, is there a legislative mandate that requires us to do anything regarding the two House bills that you mentioned?
We follow the law. So the first House bill that modified, 3124, that modified our current code, we could tweak our code right now to make it verbatim. We don't need to. Our code currently has all those tools.
Okay.
Those are allowed for a few other Multnomah County specific things. The 3113, that says that if you do impose time, place, and manner restrictions, they have to be objectively reasonable.
Okay.
We don't have them. So if you were to do that, they'd have to be reasonable, objectively
So in
reasonable.
3115, let me be clear. It says if we do, so the bill is permissive, it's not mandated.
That's the way I read it.
That we put in time, place, and manner, but we could decide to do that.
Yes, Chair, that's correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure, and I'm sure we'll have great discussion today. Commissioner Scholl, you're up.
Mr. Madcore, for Clackamas County to improve the living conditions for people who are homeless without providing a safety off the street RV and overnight car camping place or a safety off the street camping facility, is there anything we can do now to improve the situation without building or creating those two safety off the street facilities?
Mr. Bunce, could you respond to that question, please?
I think actually your question is a great policy one as far as more of the social services side. Legally, what we have is right now a very conservative approach to this problem, and that we're not actively trying to limit where people can camp. And as far as it's a good position to take in an uncertain area of the law. You know, the Ninth Circuit has spoken on this in those two cases, and that's the law here in the West Coast. Other circuits are dealing with that question right now, and it has not gone to the U.S. Supreme Court yet. So by taking this approach, we have less risk to the county. However, your question is how do we help people who are camping? And I think that's one that regulating where they can be doesn't necessarily help them. I think more of the help might come from the social services side, but that's different than what we're here to talk about today with regulating camping. I think that if we can identify something that, separate from what we're looking at in the statutes that we want to try to regulate, we can help put together those types of code changes. If you're looking at, for instance, people are camping along I-205, and that's a danger. And those would be types of dangers you could put in there as far as a reasonable time, place, and manner. Like using the road code, you cannot camp in the clear zone within the right-of-way, because that's a danger. Those are types of things that we could implement that would be reasonable time, place, or manner restrictions. You can't be right along the side of the road where there's, high volume of traffic. That would be an example that would improve the safety, for instance. Also, public health risks. If we're finding that there's people are getting sick or there's a disease we're trying to control because of large camping areas, you can put something in there as far as the number to control the number so you don't have the same sort of public health risk to either people camping or the neighborhood or the environment that they're camping within.
Okay, so I personally would like to see us go with your option 3, but to do that, it seems to me, because I see that as having the potential for resulting in a very clean and safe county. But before we can implement your option 3, seems we would need those places to direct, encourage the people to go to. So then we can come up with something more like the city of Bend, which I think would result in a starkly different landscape in Clackamas County than what we see to the north.
Yeah, I think whenever you designate places, you direct people to certain zones. You also have this state-created danger doctrine that we get into. If we're starting to, it's a legal doctrine, state-created danger. We're putting people in one area, then we have a duty to regulate that area, or a duty to police it, essentially, to make sure that the people who are there are safe. So if we create a campground, we need to make sure that we're doing it intentionally and have a lot of good policy behind how we build it, the size, and then we were able to maintain it. Much like our Veterans Village, is a very good example of the way that has succeeded, but that's not camping, but a level below that, but in some intentional way to mitigate some of the risks. Otherwise, cities have gotten in trouble in California for just saying, you can camp over there, and there's terrible results.
Yeah. Well, one final comment or question is that, we've talked about these safety off the street projects since I've been here. I realize they come with some difficulty, but I believe that we need to get going on them and create them. We have the ability to do that, to manage them properly, to make safe places, truly safe places for people who are currently living in a miserable situation. So somehow we need to get all these pieces together so we can implement your option 3. Thank you very much.
I have some questions too, but before I ask my questions, Commissioner Savas, you're in the queue.
Yeah, so as I read this, I have a few questions. I'm just going to ask them one at a time. As I read this material that we've got in the packet here today, is it fair to say that where jurisdictions have got themselves in trouble, where they said they just outright banned camping in their entire jurisdiction, that's where they got in trouble, correct?
Or if they just outright allowed it.
Okay. Secondly, it also appears, if I read this correctly, that providing places for people to go, homeless individuals, people to go, that it's not a requirement to have adequate capacity, it's just a requirement to have it, right? You can be out of capacity, but you can have a place to go to. That's how I'm read part of this package. Is that correct?
I think the Boise case, you're not required to have sheltering. You're also not, you can have no sheltering, you just then can't criminalize that behavior, or you cannot find that behavior essentially under the Blake case. So if you don't have adequate capacity, you're unable to fine or criminalize the behavior. But if you do have capacity, then you can say, look, you can't camp here, and then you would need to make it reasonably available so that people can get to it. And I think it's, looking at the way that case is, there's a lot of unanswered questions, and the kind of the cautious approach is to be somewhere in the middle. You don't want to ban it, you don't want to outright permit it. It's kind of a there's a lot of different ways to implement this, and one is sheltering, housing, all the different pieces of this, but the courts aren't giving us clear direction as to what it has to be. But you can't go all the way on one end of the scale without then creating some other significant risks.
Yeah, I guess, I think part of the frustration of a lot of people is that, what we can do on our own private property, others can do on public property. So there's essentially, there's some frustration out there that there's a double standard. For example, my neighbor could receive a code violation if he has someone that's camped on his property currently, whether that's a tent or whether that's a structure that was illegally placed or a camper or a motorhome. They're going to violate, they're going to be in trouble and get a code enforcement action taken against them. But if they're on the street, that's okay, on a public street. That's okay. That's the double standard. That's creating a lot of heartache and frustration. And I don't see anything in all those pages that addresses that adequately, right? I understand that this is about not the private citizens who have a property and home and the wherewithal. It's about the homeless individuals, and certainly we have concerns about that for them and our community as well. But I guess as complex as this is in the two different court cases, it kind of is similar to the parking management discussion we just had. We need to have a strategy. Maybe the word plan is not the right thing. Maybe we have a strategy and a plan in place as a result of the strategy to address this in a way that does not impact our communities, our neighborhoods, keeps our neighborhoods safe, and addresses the problem as best as possible. And I think that's the level of sophistication we need. And frankly, these two last sessions are related.
It's the same problem for both, right? Unhoused people. So yes, I think I can see the relation there. These cases are coming out of more of the homelessness context, not somebody in an RV, for instance, which is a big problem that we deal with in code enforcement, as you know, as well. But yes, I think that if it's something that you want to regulate, we want to be clear about very objective type standards. If it's, like I said, the road code is a good place to start, stay out of the right of way because of safety. You can regulate the size of the camps due to public health reasons. But it's a policy question as to what that should be, and I think that's something where we need to have some good input from our social services folks who work with these individuals, and what they see is, when these camps turn into significantly dangerous places, for instance. But yes, those are things that we can then help craft the code to address. And I think where, like I said, right of way is one thing, but if you wanted to limit it to different parts of the county, in the urban environment, for instance, that's another way to look at it as far as the density and what the impacts would be.
So when it comes to let's go to parking for a while. So if someone is camped out on the street and they do not have a license or registration, it's out of date or it's non-existent, and then on that same street, someone's got their own vehicle parked out over there, and it's also got registration out of date, so forth. The person who's got, the neighbor who's got their vehicle on the street, they may not have a license, is subject to a fine, right? Because it's not licensed, but the person in the motorhome who doesn't have the license is not subject to a fine because they reside there. Is that correct?
Well, you could be subject to a fine for the vehicle itself. That's different than how you would control a situation. If it's an unoccupied vehicle with expired tags, that's one way to handle it, and it could be towed. But if somebody's living in it, you can't tow a vehicle with somebody living in it, and that's a different analysis or a different question. All of that can be addressed, but you have, again, different situations. And one is, but they're both subject to the same type of a fine. It's just what you can do with them.
Yeah. As I visited some folks on Friday on Causey, there's an abandoned motorhome, right, that's taking up space over there in an area that's already has a huge parking restriction, but there's nothing they can do about it.
The motorhome issue is something that we've talked about for years now, right? And Commissioner Scholl just sent us a new one today about an abandoned RV trailer that's been there for a while. Sooner or later, someone's going to torch that thing. What happens with those things typically, there's no registration on them, and the former owner sold it 8 years ago, and that person is probably 80 years old right now with really no liability to him or her. And that's the history. We try to track him down, and that's what we find. But we've been down on Minuteman Way a number of times. We've towed things out of there that were laden with trash and drug paraphernalia, but sometimes you have human activity in there. And that's the hard part. That's when you get H3S to come down. Can we take you somewhere else before we pull your 40-foot immobile, like derelict trailer out of here and pay $5,000 to dispose of it? That's the issue we have with RVs. And that's a separate and distinct one. It really is. And I feel your pain on that. It presents itself daily. The camping one is different, though, when you have people in tents or lying on sidewalks or making makeshift shelters on a sidewalk or on county property. That one's a bit different than the RV. The RV requires really a state fix on this, whether it's a fund, and there's work underfoot in, at the legislature on creating a fund for that, and we're working with our PGA folks on making sure that it's going to be something that the county supports. But that's all money. You need a lot of money for the RV issue. And I hear what you're saying. I mean, they're dumped all over the place. I mean, they're dumped on Clackamas River Drive.
Right. So for people that are camped out on a sidewalk, a public sidewalk, blocking the sidewalk, let's say a handicapped citizen lives up the street and now has to wander out into the line of traffic in order to get around the person who's camping on the street, is there action we can take?
You don't have time, place, and manner restrictions right now. The police could certainly take action. Can you please clear this out? Because limiting access to the courthouse, you're limiting access to the fire department, you're limiting access to some other private businesses and things along those lines, but you basically move them 10 feet, right? It's not going to be, we're going to take you elsewhere. If you had time and place and manner restrictions, you could, if you had other places for them to be situated.
So the recommendation of staff is option 3?
This is your call on what you want to do. As you know, the homeless issue, it is a thorny one, and you have, like I said, you have to find a place to put them. Like whether it's an RV, like, okay, you can park your RV here for the night. You will need to be prepared to have discussions with the neighbors, people who are affected by the proximity of these uses. But yes, we're happy to aid you in that lift, absolutely. And if you are serious in addressing the RV issue, it sounds like on that prior policy session you are. From what I could take from that, it sounds like you're concerned about people dumping vehicles there or leaving them there. Yes, we can work with you on that. It's going to be a two-pronged, if not a three-pronged approach. We'll need H3S on board to say we have housing to place these people. So we can say, there you go, right there, and a lot, most likely, too, for these vehicles where people sleep in. There's that whole Baldock area off of 205 where it happens on the regular, apparently. Successfully, from what I understand.
Okay, we have other commissioners in the queue.
Just in closing, Chair, just to say this, I'm just kind of wondering if, frankly, it's very difficult to communicate this to the angry public when we get these calls and we're proposed with this. It's so, not only thorny, it's complex, right? So I'm just asking my colleagues or suggesting to my colleagues that maybe we have some kind of a, whether it's something on the website or I won't say a town hall, but I don't know, something. We need to educate the public in how complex this is because they think we should be doing something and it's not, we know it's not easy.
Thank you. We have a couple other commissioners, or 3, that haven't even spoken yet, and we're up on time, so I'm going to entertain that first. I have a couple questions, and I want to turn your attention to something. If the county was to provide a place to camp, and we adopt time, place, and manner, do those people have to go there? The illegal campers, do they have to go there? Can they be forced to go there?
Forced, I think what you'd find is if you're going to cite them for being someplace that's not allowed, then you would, yes, you have to go over here or we can cite you if you wanted to set up your ordinance in that manner. It's a little more risk because if it's not found to be objectively reasonable that we don't have enough capacity, for instance, then there could be some risk to the county for that. And I think we'll know as some of these other cities implement their plans and how those are received, if they're subject to lawsuits and how they're being challenged, and that'll be coming soon. But yes, you could do that. You could draft an ordinance that you could be cited for not camping or not parking in these designated places, for instance. But again, there's more risk associated with it. If you want to have it set up more that these are the general areas we cannot be, and then move people on from that, because honestly, in a lot of these situations, as we know from the discussion around Measure 110 as well, a lot of these programs to cite or fine people, they don't have anything to pay it. We never collect those, and you just have another kind of administrative burden to deal with in our courts.
So I guess the expectation would be from the community, if we were to have a place for homeless camping, then the expectation would be, oh, somebody would call in, see somebody on the sidewalk, we would go out forcibly, pick them up, and take them over there, and I think that's where the rub is. The community outreach on this has to be huge. I believe it took Wilsonville 2 months just of community outreach to land in one place, and then where do we put them? Again, not in my backyard, not over here, unless we have our own property. I want to turn your attention to a really well-written, on page 24 of the packet, and it's from the League of Oregon Cities, and it's a paragraph in conclusion, and I really want commissioners to take that into heart, and I'm going to read part of it. I'm not going to read all of it. First of all, it outlines all of the legal situations that has been presented us today. But it says, ultimately, how a city or / county chooses to regulate its public property, particularly in relation to persons experiencing homelessness, is a decision each city and/or county make on its own. A decision should be made not just on the legal principles at play, but its own community's needs, and be done in coordination with all relevant partners. As with any major decisions, cities are advised, or counties, to consult with experts on this topic, as well as the best practice models, while considering the potential range of public and private resources available for local communities. Cities and counties have a greater success of crafting ordinances which are not only legally acceptable, but are accepted by their communities. And that is key, commissioners. If the process for creating such ordinances is an inclusive process that involves advocates and people experiencing homelessness. So that is what's in front of us. We can sit here and say, we're going to adopt Measure 3, but by adopting Measure 3 today, does that legitimize homeless camping? And that's the question. Oh, Board of County Commissioners just said we're going to have homeless camping in Clackamas County without any process or means or communication to go out and do that. And that's why I'm extremely hesitant. In light of Project Turnkey, we heard from people in the community and businesses, they did not want it there. Now, this could be proceed before we get our ducks in a row. If we were to adopt Measure 3, we're legitimizing homeless camping in Clackamas County. I don't want it to be perceived that way. I would like, Commissioner Scholl, if you want to do that, we go ahead and we start putting some plans and processes in place and outreach to the community and how we do it. And so how would we do that, gentlemen?
I would say it's already been legitimized by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in 2 separate opinions, so you can't criminalize it, is what they're saying. You can't civilly impose. You can put reasonable barriers around it or parameters around it.
But our citizens don't know that. That's my point. We're in an echo chamber in this room. We talk to each other, we get it, we understand Boise decision. Every time I go out, and I've done a lot of outreach on this, on the Boise decision, people don't even know what it is. That's my point, Stephen. We understand it, but the community of where we might put these camping sites does not understand why we're doing that.
If you were to go to option 3 and consider implementing time, place, and manner restrictions on unlawful camping on public property, I would say have outreach to your religious and fraternal organizations. I would say have outreach with your cities to see if we can kind of tag team and cross-train in those regards. I would include the ODOT people because of the right-of-ways on Interstate 205. I would include the sheriff's office and/or other law enforcement. And I would include HRS people and other nonprofits, Father's Hearts and a variety of other places that do these housing of advocates, and say, how best are we going to get to a safe, secure, compassionate resolution to this issue without us having to put up with the NIMBYs argument at every meeting you have?
Oh, yeah, I think we will, unless we're able to pick a publicly owned property that's not in a neighborhood. Just judging from the way we react, we just need to figure it out, is what I'm saying, okay? Commissioner West and then Gary.
Thank you. God, this is tough. Heartbreaking. I was on the city council when Wilsonville started to address this issue. And then now I'm here, so I wasn't a part of the last couple months, but early on, absolutely part of that conversation in the city of Wilsonville. I think they went, in my opinion, a little further than a lot of other jurisdictions in how they decided to handle this. There's some angst in Wilsonville around the decision of the council. It's my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not an attorney, but we don't have to have a sanctioned place, but we have to have a place that's legal for them to sleep. Am I correct? We have to have a public place that's legal for them to be there if they're there, but we don't actually have to have like a campsite set up
Right.
or something like what Wilsonville did.
You don't need to designate a place,
What
but
was that?
you do not need to designate a place.
Okay.
But if you do have time, place, and manner restrictions, if you criminalize that or make them subject to a fine, then you're going to run afoul of the Blake case or the
Okay.
Boise case.
I'll pay back on that question. When you say time, manner, and place, we could say in X location from 8 PM to 8 AM, and then you have to be gone, right? Well, that's a lot to manage,
Right.
right? Do we have we need to know if we have the capacity to make sure those tents are gone. You pop it up at 8, you leave at 8, and we have to make sure they are gone. And then, do we have the capacity to enforce pop-ups and to make sure they are only where they're supposed to be and designated? That is an insane and difficult lift for a local jurisdiction. And we're bigger than the 16 small cities in Clackamas County. But that's what it would take if we actually did. What is our ability to actually regulate and run it well, the policy? That has me super concerned. And the murkiness of a lot of this is like, it's a little nebulous, and it makes me anxious a little bit in what we do.
You can regulate, operate is a different story entirely.
Well, what good is the regulations without being able to operate the regulations,
Those
to
are-
his question?
Those are administrative operational functions. Like, we can give you the legal tools to do it, but if you're not going to have anybody there providing outhouses, providing security, providing oversight, providing wraparound services, all those other functions, we gave you the tool, but somebody has to use it, right? So, it's a complex issue. It is.
So legally, are we in a position, the way we're set up right now, where the county is at risk? Or is there something we can do to help the livability of vibrant, good, clean public spaces, where we could put a little bit of, I don't understand legally, based on our capacity to regulate it, where that sweet spot is with what we're dealing with. We are mandated to do this. It's real super tough. I'm just like, I don't know, do you understand what I'm saying? We have 3 options before us, but you guys don't have a recommendation. You're like, hey, just pick one. We'll do whatever you guys want. But I don't know. I'm stuck. It's murky. I'm anxious. I was being honest how I feel about it. I don't know where that sweet spot is where the county should be.
Jeff mentioned to you the state creative danger, which is
Yes.
if you build it, they will come, and if they come, you are responsible.
So if we want to go clean up this very looking new, permanent, redeveloped homeless camp coming up Beaver Creek, you can turn onto Malala, just look into the trees and the goalie down there. It's looking pretty permanent.
Newell Creek, that's Newell Creek.
Newell Creek, see, I'm the new guy.
Isn't that all Oregon City, though?
Yeah.
No, it's not all Oregon City, but I don't know, when you're driving up, you would think it is. The poor guy driving up, going to work and doing his job to be a good citizen, looks over there and is like, what are they doing, right? They just get angry, and it makes it so much harder to pass a policy or do something good, because perception's reality in our business, and the reality for everybody is that this is a mess. And so I guess I'm trying to figure out, if we go over there on some county property, let's hypothetically say that is county property, and we go to clean that up, Do we really, to be effective, have to have something, a designated space for them to go so we can start cleaning up sites like that? It's super murky and confusing.
Right. That's the problem we struggle with these cases as well, that there is no clear answer right now. We can post it under our code, and our code requires 5 days right now. That could be shortened to 72 hours as a small fix to speed up the process by which we could clean the camps. But then again, do we have the resources and the contractors to get there that quickly? And that's another concern that would be presented. So, right, it's you can regulate it, but can you actually enforce it? And then where do they go? And do they go to a place that is more difficult for us? We don't know. And that's this, because this process is ongoing all the time, and I think that is Oregon City over there. We hear about it somewhat from our neighborhood livability project, because it comes out of the DA's office when it crosses over into our county properties, but Newell Creek isn't something that we're following on that.
I guess I want us to do the right amount of regulations that we can do good government with, and not to overdo it. And I don't want to put the county at risk and put us in a situation with one hand tied behind our back and inability to do good government because of legal mandates and the state have put upon us. I don't know, like, within the realm in which we need to do something within that time, manner, and custom. I don't know where that is, and I don't know the capacity of our local government to address it. I don't think it's being dealt with well now, but I don't know legally, like, if you guys probably did it this way, this is a good model that might fit the county. Legally, you're really safe and good, and it might be the best you can do. I don't know what that policy is right now, and I don't know where that legal boundary is. That's where I'm at. But I don't want to vote for anything that we can't actually do. That's also, yeah.
Well said. Gary, and then we have more commissioners.
Yes, two suggestions. First, commissioners, you are discussing having a series of summits in the community to discuss homeless issues. This could be a topic you discuss in those meetings to get feedback before you make any decision. So that is a forum to have that conversation with the business community, the cities, and the community. Second, I always have to tell you, commissioners, when I'm concerned about staff capacity, and this is another one, I'm concerned about the capacity to implement this. I mean, you're talking the legal issues today, but we'd have to put a whole program together for staff to implement this. And so simply, I'd have to come back to you once again and ask, what would you like us to not do instead to put this on the radar for our staff?
And what departments does this entail?
It'd be Health, Housing, Human Services primarily, but Public and Government Affairs, County Council, County Administration, probably Transportation and Development, the Sheriff's Office. There's a lot of offices that would be involved.
We really do need buy-in in the local police departments as well. Oregon City, all the nonprofits, business entities. Yeah, okay, we have 3 commissioners, and this is a great discussion. Commissioner Schrader.
So, do we have to make a decision today?
No.
So my suggestion is this. I would say for the time being, I like, Gary, your suggestion is spot on. If we keep the county code as is for the time being, not with the intention, I'm trying to word this carefully, of really looking forward to moving towards 2 or 3 after we do the groundwork with these other folks. Now, I can tell you that we do not have to reinvent the wheel. Our North Star in this arena is Lane County, and we are in the process, I believe, with H3S, integrating now the sticks and bricks with the services, which Lane County has been the leader in for the past 10 years. So we have these things already happening in process, and I know that our H3S staff is working on that integration and pulling together a more effective group of people that includes the externalities of the health system, the externalities of business thought leaders, the externality of realtors, the whole 9 yards. That colleagues right now, that that integration is happening. So I would say, let's stick with number one for the time being. Let's track the integration that's been happening. I did talk to the governor about this, only once, because I'm not that important to the governor, quite frankly. But she also said Lane County gave them the best report on what she wants to have from her initiative from the top down. And I said, yes, that's because they have an integrated system, as I just described. We're not there yet. We have to give staff the time to get to that point before we move to number 2 or 3. And I would strongly suggest to my colleagues, Commissioner Savas and I have been back and forth to Lane County numerous times. They have safety off the streets. They actually have a low barrier facility, and they built one, but they did it after they managed to have high barrier facilities to prove to the community this kind of thing can work. And it has its own sets of problems that also would inform, what we're talking about when it's a low barrier. That I would not start with in this county. That will not work. It will not work.
I agree.
So I would suggest let's stick with number 1 for the time being. Let's give staff to get their work. Let's see where they are in that integration piece. I would suggest my other colleagues look at the Lane County model, and if you haven't visited them yet, we get down there and do it again. And Commissioner Pat Farr is the point person for this, and he got started because he's a Vietnam veteran, and one of his buddies, veterans, basically a friend, froze on the street because he was homeless. So he managed to move this huge mountain, this huge boulder up the hill to the pinnacle, with his dedication and resolve. So that would be my suggestion. I think we need to do the groundwork first. So that's it.
Thank you. Commissioner Scholl?
This morning, at King County, LA County, Marin County, Multnomah County, and 100 times that number, counties, Philadelphia, LA, Seattle, Portland, and 100 times that many cities are sitting around talking about the same problem. And most of these counties and cities are not winning. They're not solving this problem. What we need to be tough on this. We have some limitations, the Grants Pass decision, the Boise decision. I don't see us making a decision today on one of these 3 options, but what we need to do, we need to realize that we must come up with a couple of these projects, these safety off the street projects, to give us the ability to enforce or to give our sheriff the ability to move people off the street and into something. Like Mr. Madcore said, we can also work with our nonprofits and our churches to give us some other options. But we need to get tough on it. Now, I know that Administrator Schmidt's concerned about staff time, but again, if we came up with a focus for staff time, to come up with a couple of these options to get cars to a safe overnight parking place, to get RVs to a safe overnight parking place. We can come up in some measure of time with a solution where we can implement option 3, put together these projects so we can have the ability in this county to do what other counties and cities are not doing, and that is actually do the tough love, be tough, and get this county to a place where our citizens can feel safe and where the people who are not homeless can feel safe. Okay? So it's gonna take a little bit of work here, a little bit of time. And also, we've committed to this blue ribbon panel issue, okay? This needs to be incorporated in with the public hearings on this. So I don't mean to be so vague right now, but these are the parts we must put together. We cannot let this county be like so many other counties in this nation that are just overwhelmed with a problem and not really solving the problem. Am I making sense, Mr. Schmidt?
Yes, you are, yes.
Mr. Madcore, does
Yes,
that
sir.
make sense?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Savas, and then we're going to have to move on.
Yeah, I just want to say that if the example of the Quality Inn was to show or use that as an example that how people can get worked up on a false narrative, the false narrative being that we were going to put a campsite there. That's not the case. We know that. That we were going to have homeless camping there. That's not true either. But if the example was for those who spread that false narrative, and that's the example, the reaction, certainly that just goes to show that this is something that people have a lot of passion and concern about, and that's my legitimate concern, as well as the irony of all this is that the hotel model has taken a lot of people off the street already, hundreds. It is working, and so we need to have the pipeline of solutions in place. So I advocate that we need to continue on with what's working, build on what's working. We have resources out there to do that. We can limit the exposure to our community, which I think we have a responsibility to do. Well, I know we have a responsibility to do, in my opinion. And again, what Eugene has, and Commissioner Schrader's correct, they have actually filled the gaps. They have a pipeline for solutions for virtually every aspect of all the different types and cohorts of people that find themselves in homelessness for one reason or another. And that's different in every community. The cohort in Portland, for the most part, is different than the cohort in Clackamas as it is in Lane County. So it's just different. And our point-in-time count demonstrates that to some degree. But whether we choose 1, 2, or 3 today, nothing's going to happen tomorrow, right? I mean, we're just talking about amending or changing, and there's a lot of work in that. And I think a public process for that has to be done. How that's done and how that's simplified in a way that's comprehensive to the average person watching or listening or opining on it is important. But this is a sticky wiki, and I think, again, I just want to put in that we need to continue on with what's working so we can limit the exposure to this and make sure, number one, we're helping the people that need to help, and at the same time protecting our communities for all the reasons we all discuss and agree on. So I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. I don't disagree with anything any commissioner has said today. If this discussion has shown anything, is that this is extremely difficult, being very mindful of what the community's perceptions and needs are. And I don't want this to blow up in our face, as Commissioner Savas said last time with Project Turnkey. We have to bring, and I want commissioners, please, go back to page 24 and read that paragraph and read the League of Oregon Cities analysis, and then really wrap your head around how are we going to do this. And it's going to take a lot of time. Gary, with what you have heard today, I don't want just to abandon this and not revisit it. What would you recommend how we proceed down the line on this without adopting measure option number 2 or 3?
So what I'm hearing today is it's really option 1, keep the code as is for now, today. And then I would propose that, from what I've heard, use the Blue Ribbon Committee you're about to form and the community summits to add this topic to that. So get the perspective of the community and the experts that will be on the panel to help advise you. I'll give me time to work with Mr. Madcore and our staff internally to come up with what programmatic work we would need to do to support this work, and then come back to you, not immediately, but in the next several months on all this feedback for you then to make a decision.
And in the meantime, we should probably schedule some community town halls to address this topic and any other topic regarding this issue. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly. how we're going to lead off with this for the community, but we need to, and it needs to be one of the first considerations. And it's a huge education process, huge education process. Yeah, okay. Yes, Ben?
I'd also like to know, like, which legal option puts the county at the least amount of risk?
The one you're at right now.
Is the least amount, oh, I just spilt coffee, oh, sorry.
Do I talk about the county, the government, or the county, the people?
The county,
Or
the
the county,
entity
the
that I
neighbors.
represent.
There you go. That's different, because we're trying to represent the people out in the neighborhoods and communities. That's the difference
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And I want to know, like, what, I also don't want to get caught up in a quagmire of crazy legal action either. So I want to find that balance between the best government we can do based on the legal realities we've been faced with.
I think the game plan set forth by the chair and Gary's a sound one. Involve people.
Involve people going forward.
So I have a question for Gary, because I'm prepared to make a motion. Do we have to choose 1, 2, and 3, or can I just move to table the discussion for further
I
analysis?
recommend you don't need to do anything today.
Okay, great.
Keeping the code as is. We have a plan of
Keep the
process to
code.
come forward back
So
to.
at this point in time, the consensus would be to keep the code. Do we need a motion? I don't think so. Nope.
And commissioners, look,
Right.
give your opinions, tell staff what you want to have out of this, so we can bring it back and thoroughly hash through it. We just need to be involved in this, and I'm going to tell you, community outreach is so important on this. Okay? Well, thank you for the very good discussion. Thank you, staff, for coming forward. Seeing no further business before this commission, we are adjourned.